In the period between 1820 and 1860, the nation was gripped with a religious fervor that had many different expressions. And we call this the Second Great Awakening. But unlike the First Great Awakening, which was quite short, 1739 to 1745, and pretty limited in scope, it just had sort of one purpose, to increase evangelical religion, the Second Great Awakening lasts a long time. It doesn't have a definitive beginning or end, and the leaders are much more widespread, right? There isn't just sort of a George Whitefield celebrity that gets this all going. It's much broader in scope. There's a lot of different leaders, and it manifests in many, many different ways. Nor does it have a singular particular message. So what is it? Well, it's a religious movement that changed the culture of America. And what you see here is one aspect of that revival, which is revival meetings. Just like in the First Great Awakening, there are these large meetings, hundreds, even thousands of people. They have to be held outdoors because there's so many people, where people come and listen to preachers talk about heaven and hell and salvation, and where people get very excited, right? There's this sort of sense that if you don't do something, you're going to go to hell, that you might be able to get to heaven if you have a conversion. It's a very emotional and relatively scary process, right? People in the audience had a tendency to swoon, bark like dogs, roll around on the ground, and you can see some of that here, right? People giving praise, falling down, fainting, right? They get very excited and express a lot of emotion. One of the major preachers of the Second Great Awakening is Charles Grandison Finney, and that's him here. He was born in Connecticut but raised in the burned over district of New York. And the burned over district in New York is an area I'll talk about soon. It's an area that had a lot of industrialization because of the Erie Canal and because of railroads. So there was a lot of factories and a lot of immigrants. So there's a lot of sort of the Protestant temperance reformers and a lot of immigrants. It's a place where, because of the industrialization, there's a lot of anxiety over the state of affairs and the change of society, and people turn to religion. So the burned over district is an area where there's so many religious revivals, right, fires of religion, that it's burned over. So that's the burned over district. So Charles Grandison Finney is raised in this area of New York. He has a religious experience that leads him to preach, and it becomes very popular. Now, this is a quote that he has about what's the purpose of revivals, right? He says, a revival of religion presupposes a declension. That's when there's less religion. A declension is the loss of religion. Almost all the religion in the world has been produced by revivals. God has found it necessary to take advantage of the excitability there is in mankind to produce powerful excitements among them before he can lead them to obey. They must be so excited that they will break over these counteracting influences before they will obey God. The will is, in a sense, enslaved by the carnal and worldly desires. Hence it is necessary to awaken men to a sense of guilt and danger, and thus produce an excitement of counter-feeling and desire which will break the power of carnal and worldly desire and leave the will free to obey God. So what's he saying here? He's saying that religion is God's way of bringing people to salvation. And that revivals, right, is a way of God is designed by God. God does a revival, right? God is influencing you and convincing you to come to Him. And this is, of course, very different than how a sociologist, for instance, would look at a revival and say, we can see that people are struggling more here, and when people struggle more, they look to other things to help them, and religion is one way to do that. He also has a quote on slavery. Right? He says, the churches must take right ground on the subject of slavery. Nothing is more calculated to endure religion and to endure the slaves themselves than for Christians to get into an angry controversy on the subject. However, Christians cannot attempt to take neutral ground on the subject. It is a great national sin. It is a sin of the church. The churches, by their silence and by permitting slaveholders to belong to their communion, have been consenting to it. All denominations have been more or less guilty, although the Quakers have of late years washed their hands of it. It is in vain for the churches to pretend it is merely a political sin. So what he's saying is that here is one of the major sins of the era. So at the same time we have the increase of slavery, we have this counter influence, which is religion, and it feeds into the reformers of the time who say this is a major sin, this is a sin on our society, and we need to get rid of it. So the Second Great Awakening feeds into the reforms, and it feeds into sort of the North-South divisions on the issue of slavery.